This is a 2¼ litre 4-cylinder Land Rover engine, or more precisely 2286 cc's. Power maxes out at about 74 horsepower, which is, not much. Torque about 120 foot-pounds, which is pretty good, actually. Still, the fact that these Land Rovers couldn't do more than about 95 kilometers per hour meant that a lot of people swapped the original 4-cylinder engines for something with more grunt. In New Zealand and Australia, the Holden red motors were favoured, so much so that conversion kits were commercially available. And look, I understand that 40 years ago, guys were using these Land Rovers as commercial vehicles, contractors, service vehicles, running into town from the farm, or whatever this is. And the bigger engines were just faster. But now these are classic cars. No one's charging around in a Series Land Rover 7 days a week trying to earn a living keeping up with modern traffic. And these original 4-cylinder engines are fantastic. Simple, understressed, and reliable. The engines, I mean, not Land Rovers in general, obviously. But these engines will run and run and run. An absolute terrible state, oil pouring out of every gasket and piston rings AWOL. They'll still run. And in good condition, they burble along surprisingly well. Any low-speed driving, off-road, back roads, around town, there's plenty of torque available. You might even describe the experience as sprightly. So, at this stage in time, given that anyone driving one of these old Rovers is doing so because they want the charm and experience of an old Land Rover, there's no reason to be missing out on the fantastic little burbly 4-cylinder engine that Land Rover designed to go with them. Which brings us to the engine in question. This was dragged out of an old guy's shed. Literally dragged out on a piece of plywood because there was no way to get an engine lifter anywhere near it. And I don't know anything else about it. It was on the floor of old mate's shed, and he's moved on, like we all will. So that's it. It could be a good engine that he was intending to use, or a stuffed engine that he pulled out of something. No idea. Alright, let's start by getting it onto a stand. In fact, no, let's start by draining the oil. Let's make a mess now instead of later. Not too tight, that's a good sign. Now, I don't know anything about this engine. I haven't even tried to turn it over. For all I know, the crankshaft could be snapped in half. We will find out. Now, before we get into it, I am making a series of videos that should help any of you guys wanting to rebuild or work on these engines. I know how helpful it is to be able to see someone else do something before you attempt it yourself. So regular viewers, there's not many cringy, lame jokes, or as much inappropriate background music in this video. I'm making this more as a reference for the guy who's about to pull their motor apart, and hopefully put it back together. And saying that, I am not an engine rebuilder. I do have a bit of experience with these Land Rover motors, which is useful because there are a couple of tricky parts which are a struggle the first time, like the rear main T-seals for example. But compared to an actual engine rebuilder, I am a chump. This is what it's like when I drop parts off at the machinist in town. So bear that in mind, I'm not trying to teach engine rebuilding skills. But I hope these videos help. And now the much disliked old style oil filter. I don't personally have a problem with these, but I know a lot of you guys would prefer the modern cartridge style filter. Nothing in there. And now the flywheel. And this doesn't look so great. This has been exposed to the atmosphere, obviously. Where are my earmuffs? Oh, that's crusty looking. Clearly the rear main seal leaks a little bit too. Have a look at this. This is the back of the flywheel, and some muppet has ripped the engine out with a forklift or something like that and twisted the gearbox input shaft and shattered this flange on the flywheel. Yeah, you probably can't see on camera, but this is really ovalized. And that's a $700 part, so we're off to a good start. What are we snagged on? I don't think we're snagged on anything. What is happening? It's completely loose. What are you snagging on? It's like there's something in the way. Where's me gentle pry bar? What am I missing? I'll go have lunch. Well, the conclusion is that nothing is holding it on. So let's put this in here, somewhere that doesn't matter so much, and hit the other side harder. That does not feel nice. What is going on? There is an O-ring in here, and I think it's just caught on the O-ring, although it feels solid, which is why I'm being a little cautious. Oh, there. Now, there we go. That's better. Yeah. It was just this O-ring in here, and it's a little crusty. It felt metallic though, that's why I was a little cautious. Look at this tasty mess. Oh, not too bad. This side's a little more crunchy. Anyway, let's get this thing on a stand. All right, now, I haven't used this for anything else, I don't think, so it should still be set up for one of these. Is it going to go this way? Yep, pretty much. Okay. Now, if you are putting one of these on a stand, these threaded holes are 3/8 UNF. On my stand, these sticky out bits are 65 millimeters long, and the bolts I'm using are about 88 millimeters long, which is 3.5 inches. And that works fine in these blind holes, with a couple of washers at least. You know, you can probably adjust from there if you want to order the bolts in advance. All right, let's get some of these accessories off. I guess we'll start with the alternator since we're facing this way already. I'll just leave this one in place until we can get this off more easily. You can see the other bolt is covered by the pulley. which we are not taking off yet. Now the fan looks okay, no problems. Ooh. Water pump doesn't feel so great, but that's all right. Dipstick. And in fact, if we spin around, it doesn't really spin. If we do a 5-point turn, you can see that this engine came with 2 more dipsticks. So that's pretty good. And now we're on to the fun side of the engine, where the party is. By party, I mean wires and stuff. All right, we'll start with the Lucas distributor, the 25D, I believe it is. It looks all original. It has the original vacuum advance on it, which is good because we can get that rebuilt, which is considerably better than buying a Britpart one. Now, are you going to come out without a fight? There it is, no problem. All right, so next we're going to remove the fuel pump. And first of all, there's a small clip up here. And I'm not using the gun on these thermostat bolts because they are very long and probably rusty. And I would like to get them out. That was no problem. And see this clip? And the other clips around the engine like this, don't throw those out. They are no longer available, at least not like this. And the replacement modern P-clips are nothing like the same. Okay, just put that back for now. Well, that was very loose and barely on there. Somebody was definitely playing with this engine before it was abandoned. If you're replacing the pump, you can either take the pump off, like I am here, which is a bit annoying because it's held on with nylon nuts that you can't really get a socket onto. Or you can just remove the backing plate. But in this case, we have to pull everything apart anyway, so I'll just remove the pump and then the backing plate. All right, first look at the camshaft, the all-important camshaft. These camshafts last a very long time, normally, so it would be good if we could reuse this one. Now this is a little interesting. I believe this blanked off plate should be an oil fill tube on this engine, and instead somebody has installed this plate to get rid of the emissions crap, the CCV system. Which is pretty typical. Land Rover owners are obsessed with removing the CCV system. I was going to talk about the different CCV systems that Land Rover used on these engines because it's something that I see done wrong all the time. It's not complicated, but to avoid a 5-minute tangent in this video, I'll leave that for a separate video. Almost forgot that little piece. And now the plugs. What is going on here? These aren't the standard sized plugs, are they? No, they are not. These are the smaller sized ones. I don't know what that means. Doesn't necessarily mean the ends are wrong. But they're taking the smaller sized socket. Oh, they are crusty. This is not the right thread. Oh, this is good news. Oh, I see. I think somebody has just jammed these not correct spark plugs in here to stop the water getting in. Probably buggered the threads at the same time. So that's something to look forward to. Oh, yeah, great. Yeah, those are the wrong size plugs. No point looking at these because I do not believe these were run in this engine. I think these are just random plugs that somebody has jammed in the hole. Next we'll get the thermostat off, and I think these are the original hose clamps, so we'll try not to bugger these up. I'm not reusing this hose, obviously. It's going to be a real fight getting these off. And I noticed that this is stamped Rover, so this is an original water pump. That's nice, they can be rebuilt. That's the wrong size. Hey! No thermostat, just an empty hole. There should be one of these things sitting in here. There's grass and dirt in there. It's always what you want in your cooling system. I'm not going to reuse this. And this is the oil feed pipe for the head. The oil is pumped up through here, through the rocker shaft, and then self-drains back down to the sump. The rocker cover is not attached, so that's easy. Okay, now we're going to remove the valve gear, or the rocker shaft. The whole assembly is one piece. All of these rockers are under tension right now because of the valve springs. Well, not all of them, but the ones that are. And if we start undoing all of these bolts, it's going to become a bit of a mess. It could bend things and stuff. So we've got to loosen all of the rockers first. And then just unwind any that aren't already loose. Loose, 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 loose. Loose. This one's tight. Loose. Okay. So now that there's no pressure on the rocker shaft, we can take it out. These smaller bolts just go through into the head. These larger ones at the front go all the way through into the block. They're actual head bolts. I think there are dowels on the bottom of these rocker shaft holder thingies, so it shouldn't spring apart just yet. Now these should be fairly tight, of course. That was tight. Okay, now lucky for me, this hasn't exploded in my face yet. But there are quite a few springs in here, and it will if we don't take precaution. So this is a trick that is not really a trick because it's in the service manual. We have a convenient handle to pick up the rocker shaft. That'll do. And there we go. No mess. Yet. I mean, we're just delaying the part where I have to take this off and it explodes in my face. No, I'm kidding, it's not too bad. Okay, so here's where we have to start being a little more careful. Because if we reuse these push rods, which we may well do, they have to go back in exactly the same place. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They shouldn't be mixed up. Same applies to the valves, the lifters down in here. We probably won't be reusing the valves, but for now I'll keep all the valves in order as well. 1, 2, 3, and annoyingly I've run out of bags, so I'll just put a piece of tape around these last 2. Well, let's get this head off. Come on, you bugger. Whew, it's getting warm in here. Okay, where am I going to put this? I don't think the trestle table is a good idea. It's already pretty loaded up. Okay, you ready? It's doing nothing. Hang on. All right. Ooh, a copper gasket. That smells terrible. Oh, geez, that stinks. Oh, this stinks. I don't know what that smell is. Okay, let's get the worst of this carbon off. Just whatever. Just get it out of the way. And then we might get a truer sense of what's going on. Obviously, if the engine wasn't coming completely apart, you'd have to be really careful about stuff dropping down everywhere, but that's not what we're doing here. Now I can't see any oversized markings, which would be good news. We don't want oversized pistons, we want standard pistons. Now hopefully these will just come out easily. Otherwise we'll flip the engine over and they can drop on the floor. Gentle with the pliers. Into bag number 1. Just a note here, the manual says to pull the rollers out before the sleeves, because the rollers can fall behind the camshaft if the sleeves are removed first. Note that these are stamped front, so you can't put those in backwards. I think the little circle thingamajigs are directional, though. You want to put them back in the same direction anyway, but I think there's a way to tell. Let me get one out. I can't quite remember this. I'll have to look in the book, but if we have a look at this, I think you'll find that the indentation on the rear is a different size from the indentation on the front. So it looks like the indentation on the rear facing side is smaller than on the front. I'm sure that's written in the service manual, but like I said, it's been a while since I've pulled one of these apart. Now you do have to be careful pulling these out because sometimes the roller comes with the lifter and you don't want to drop them on the floor. Another one stuck. Okay, just got to get these two, whatever those thingies are called, out. Lifter slide things. Hopefully I can just sort of tweak them through here. Yep, so this one's moving. So that'll come out now. Number 7. There's probably a tool for this. I'm using my thumb. It's what separates me from a monkey. I think I'm going to take the sump off before I attempt to remove the front pulley. So that means I can't take the timing cover off yet. But let's get the water pump out of the way, reduce some weight before we flip it over. Yoink. One water pump. Now, I would ideally like to get this sideways because I don't want to lie on my back to take the sump off, and I don't really want to flip the engine upside down, otherwise all the oil in the sump will fall out the top onto the floor. Oh, back up, back up. All right. Sump time. This one that didn't come all the way out. It's very loose. There we go. Okay. Any treasure? No, not really. That's a little disappointing. Oh, a little bit of thick carbony sludge, but not too bad. My motor had about an inch thickness of this stuff. It's kind of like, almost like metal shavings, but it isn't. It's carbon and oil. Okay, let's move this out of the way. Doesn't actually smell too bad either. So that's nice. Everybody smells their sump, right? All right, let's see if we can get this off. The nut should come off. The problem is holding the engine, stopping it from rotating. So now I can stuff a block of wood in here if I have to, which is better than trying to jam a screwdriver through the flywheel bolts, but we may yet have to do that. Yeah, okay. Let me go find a piece of wood. We'll try this. It's not really the right sort of shape I was looking for, but I'm lazy. I'm gonna go in there. Yeah, okay. Yeah, that's not moving. Yes. Got it. Now remember, that's smoking hot, so don't go grabbing it. Good deal. Just put this back in so we have something to pull against. There it goes. And there is a key deep inside here, so check that that doesn't fall out. Alright, so here's the timing gear. Crankshaft, chain, end of the camshaft, and the tensioner. This looks a little scary, but it's not really. And now the chain. Which, looks okay. We'll be replacing it anyway. And the guide, which is fine. This isn't a BMW after all. A tiny bit of wear on there, but it's definitely not causing a problem yet. And the guide is held in with a couple of nuts that have locking tabs on them, so we'll just knock those back. And these bolts have thin heads. There's probably a reason for that, so we don't want to get these mixed up. So here's the front of the crankshaft, and this is the key that drives the pulley. So we'll get this one out so we don't lose it. Most important that you don't damage the slot. This, $2 part. This, irreplaceable. Well, replaceable in the sense that you could buy another crankshaft, I guess, but that would be an expensive mistake. Now, to undo this, you have to somehow hold the camshaft. I can't remember how I did it last time. I'm going to try and buzz it off with a gun. Probably should have loosened this before removing the chain, but too late now. No problem. And there's a special tool for getting this off that threads into these two holes. I don't have one, so we'll just try and use my generic puller, which presumably works, because I didn't have the special tool last time either. Obviously being careful not to damage the thread in the end of the camshaft. I've got a couple of washers in there. I think it'll come off pretty easy. Yeah, no problem. Voila. And another key, of course. I might take the camshaft out before I tackle this. I don't remember this square plate being here. I guess it is. So we're now ready. No, we're not. I need to get this gear out. I forgot about that gear. It's held in place with a sneaky grub screw right here. Sneaky because when the oil filter's on, how would you even know? Ah, got it. There we are. Now, I'm about to pull the camshaft. You want to be really careful here because it's likely that the camshaft and cam bearings will be in good condition. Okay, here we go, and I've got somewhere ready to put it. Yeah, that's super careful, good start. In this case, I think we will replace the bearings, but often you won't need to, so don't be rough dragging the camshaft through them. Easy. 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 There it is. Okay, let's put this down somewhere safe. Okay, let's flip this guy over. Get into the business end. This big doofer here is the oil pump. Get that out of the way first. Land Rover really enjoyed a good locking tab. There we go, oil pump removed. We will of course inspect the oil pump later, see if the inside is nice and fresh or if it's scored to pieces. Next we're going to take out the pistons, and we do that by removing the bearing caps and pushing them out through the bottom or the top. Now all of these should be marked, so before I start removing things I want to check that those markings are present, because each cap should be numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, and they also have to face forwards. Well, we've got these random numbers up top, which I think are just production numbers. So this says 18. Over on this one there's a 2 and a 9. No idea what that means. But you can see on the top here we have an arrow pointing towards the front of the engine. And then here is a 3. We're looking at number 3. The reason I'm checking before I pull things out is because sometimes people rebuild these engines and get everything mixed up. But this I can see is labelled 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's perfect. And there should also be a mark tying the cap to the conrod itself. But we'll see. If there's not, we'll stamp them. Okay, pulling the pistons out is straightforward. You undo the nuts and push them out. But I made a mistake. The most important thing is that you do not damage the crankshaft or the cylinders. In our case, we'll be reboring the block, so a tiny scratch in the cylinder isn't going to matter. But the crankshaft needs to be protected. My mistake was pure laziness. I should have put tape around the connecting rod bolt threads. Okay, that's one cap. I got the masking tape out. It's sitting just out of frame, but I thought, nah, I'll just be really careful. Right now, everything's fine. The threads aren't touching the crank. The connecting rod is resting on the bearing, but at some point while pushing the rods out, one of the threads dropped against the crankshaft and left a mark. Before I start moving things around. I didn't actually notice the mark until I was dropping the parts off at the engine rebuilders, and I said, I think the crank looks pretty good, but there is this little mark. At this point, the boss is standing there, plus 2 other guys who had just helped lift parts out of my boot, and the boss politely said, those are from the threads of a connecting rod bolt. Of course, what we all heard in our heads was, You idiot normie. Ha ha! I just laughed and said, how much is that going to cost me? And everyone laughed. Good times, but stupid. They will polish the crank, they do that anyway, and if the mark comes out, great. Otherwise we'll have to grind the crank and go to oversized bearings, which is fine, that's pretty normal anyway, so it's not a problem in that sense. But yeah, having to pay for regrinding instead of just taking 30 seconds to tape the threads is dumb. So here's the piston, and we'll look at the condition of everything later, but for now I just want to show you why getting this right is important. The top of the cap is marked. It has an arrow and a number, so you can't really get that wrong. Now, I've gone and marked here with a sharp center punch, just gently. So 2 dots for number 2, and they're on the same side. So long as these dots are together, when I put everything back together, it's correct. And the reason this is important, aside from when you rebuild an engine, everything should be matchy-matchy like it was before, but the critical point here, can you see this small hole here? This is only on one side, and that throws oil up into the cylinder. So it's really important that this isn't flipped around. Now, where were we? Yeah, my memory card filled up, so I had to go and dump that onto the computer, and then about 4 days happened. Let's get these off. There are some thrust washers in here somewhere that are probably going to fall out too. Come on. Come on. This rear one is a little different, so I'll get the bolts out of the way, because this one has the oil seal integral. And I think this is all original, which is good, because sometimes people glue these back ones in, which is not a bad idea. I'm not sure if we're going to do that or not. Come on. Here we go. All right, there's a thrust washer. Don't worry, we will definitely be replacing those. I am going to replace the core plugs on this one. You can see I've already got one of them out. On my engine I didn't touch them because they weren't leaking, so I didn't bother. It's not the end of the world if you have to change one in the vehicle. But given that this engine is probably going to somebody else, I don't want them to have to deal with a leaky core plug in 6 months' time, so we'll change them just to make sure they're nice and fresh. You can see this one is pretty crusty on the back, though I think it's a long way away from rusting right through. But we're changing them anyway. Annoyingly, I lost my audio here, but anyway. The tactic here is to first break the plug loose all around, then you want to punch one side in, and hopefully the plug sort of twists in the hole, poking the other side out. Once the plug twists, it'll come out easy. But if you punch it too far, it might drop inside the block, and that would be the start of a very bad day. So I get the screw in as early as I think I can, and often they come out easily. But I would recommend before you attempt this job that you prepare yourself for a long day, because they can be stubborn. Alright, so I've got everything cleaned up, roughly cleaned up so it's not filthy. I just realised we haven't pulled the valves out of the head, so let's go and do that. Okay, so to do this job, you need a valve spring compressor. Not a tinny little thing like you buy from Super Cheap Auto or Repco, but a proper heavy-duty valve spring compressor. This one is old, and in fact, I think I made a video about this. There you go, Stevens, made in USA. Anyway, you need something fairly heavy-duty to compress these springs. You can see down in here there's a collet, so a two-piece tapered cone thing that can't come out so long as there's spring pressure pushing against it. So the idea here is if we squash the spring down, we can remove the collet and then everything just sort of falls apart. Let's get this on this side. So this little cup side goes over the spring, and then this pointy end pushes against the valve. Hopefully you can see that this is going to compress the spring. Oh. Normally you have to remove them with a magnet, but sure, everything flying apart works fine too. Now we're going to reuse the springs. These are double springs in here. They will be fine, but we will probably replace the valves. Or well, almost certainly replace the valves. And of course, these go all into their numbered bag or container or whatever you're using. And this guy here is the valve stem seal that we can pull off and throw out. We can pull off and just pull off, throw out. Yeah, just that's the best way to do that. Yeah, these are supposed to be rubber, not hard plastic, by the way. Due for replacement, that's for sure. Okay, I think everything is ready to go. Everything is prepared and cleanish. Clean enough to handle. So let's go through everything and see what we've got. Let's start with the head, since we were just looking at it anyway. So there's no obvious cracks or anything like that. Not that I'm expecting anything like that. I don't think these engines are prone to cracking. This surface probably isn't flat, so that will be skimmed. We'll also replace the valve seats with hardened valve seats. The machine shop will do that. They will also, I'll also get them to replace the valve guides. They'll probably lap the valves in for me too. It's just easier for them to do it on their machines. So skimmed, new valve guides, new hardened valve seats, and that's about it for the head. The block, again, not expecting any cracks or anything like that, and I can't see anything obvious. So the block will be rebored to whatever size we need for whatever pistons we end up using, and the machine shop will tell me what size to purchase. So they'll say we need to go to 20 or 30 or 40 thou over. Then I order the pistons, get the pistons here, take them to the machine shop, and they will rebore the block, making sure it's right for the pistons we end up using. Again, we'll probably skim the top. So that's pretty easy. Rebore, skim. Now, unfortunately, the cam bearings do look pretty worn. I think Turners in the UK sell pre-finished bearings, but otherwise, when new bearings are installed for a camshaft, they are tighter than they need to be. And then after installation, they are line bored or honed or reamed. I'm not sure what the process is exactly, but they are machined to the correct size in line. And the block would have to be sent to Auckland to do that, so hopefully we don't need to. And now the table of misery, really high quality Land Rover parts. Let's start down here. I'll bring stuff forward because it's a little tight for the tripod. Starting with the oil filter, which you'd think would be straightforward, but unfortunately Some muppet, no doubt a forklift driver trying to do his job and vaping, has crushed the edge of the oil filter. I guess the engine was bashed into something when it was being pulled out. So this piece is trash. This is probably a little ovalized as well, but I'm sure we can straighten that out. Now when I did my engine, I used one of these adapter thingies for a cartridge style filter. And that means that I have one of these aluminium pieces somewhere in a box. I think this part on my filter was damaged, so it was just easier to use a new part, because neither of these are available new. However, since I have a good one of these, and I now have a good one of these, I think I will put that on my vehicle, because everyone else hates these, and put my adapter onto this motor. Make sense? Probably not. Moving on. Next, we got the timing cover back there in the dark, and that oil seal has never been replaced because the mud shield thingy still has the original rivets in it. This is the front pulley, and it is stuffed. There's a really deep groove where the oil seal has been rubbing, which is typical. I replaced this on my engine as well. These are readily available, and I think cheap. Hopefully cheap. And the flywheel, which as I mentioned earlier, is stuffed. The other engine I got with this one does have a flywheel on it, so we could use that. Otherwise, I will talk to the machine shop about possibly repairing this. If I had a lathe big enough to spin this, it would be a pretty easy repair, but I don't. The crankshaft. Well, I've already talked about the crankshaft, so we'll wait and see if anything else needs doing after it gets polished. The critical thing on these crankshafts, actually, is not so much the bearings. Right at the back of the crankshaft, behind this lip, that's where the rear oil seal runs, and if that has a big groove worn into it, you'd be in trouble. Thankfully, this one doesn't. It's perfectly smooth. Now, the camshaft. The camshaft looks okay. The bearing surfaces themselves look completely fine, no problem at all. However, you can see quite a lot of discoloration on the cam lobes. I think the marks are probably from the engine sitting, corrosion, rather than damage caused through running. This isn't bad. The tips are not worn at all. I can't feel any wear. But yeah, there's definitely marks and pitting in these, so I suspect this will need to be reground. We'll see. I'll see what the engine builder says. That's kind of unfortunate, just because these engines, like my one, which was really high mileage and also flogged, the camshaft and the bearings were perfect, pristine. So it's kind of unlucky to get one that needs work. Next, the connecting rods. Obviously, we're replacing the big end bearings. The small bearings at the top are possibly okay. So the small end bearings, I think, are a solid bushing, not a coated bearing. I'll order new ones in case we need them anyway, but these are reamed to fit the gudgeon or wrist pins. And since we'll be getting new pins with the new pistons, I'll check the fit when we have those. The oil pump. Well, I haven't taken that apart yet, so I don't know. I'm in a bit of a rush to get the block and the head down to the machine shop so they can give me a plan. So I will insert some footage of me inspecting this now, but I'm sure it's totally fine. Yeah, I mean, it's okay. You can see some perpendicular wear on these teeth. So it's not a polished surface by any means, but there's no evidence that any chunks have gone through it. This isn't like a hardened steel situation where any scoring is quite destructive. In fact, this gear here is aluminium. This one's steel. These gears are available, sort of. You can find new old stock floating around on eBay, and some normal sellers still have them. Yeah, I don't know. Certainly for me, this would be fine. Since this is potentially for somebody else, I might look at replacing them anyway, just so they're fresh and new. I might get a second opinion from somebody who has a clue. Okay, back to real time. And finally, the pistons. Well, first of all, there's the pile of piston rings that came out. So this engine, if anyone tried to run it as is, it would have been a little smoky. I'll be replacing these, so there's not really much to say. But let's measure them to check that they are standard size. I don't think the bottom end of this engine has ever been apart, but we better check. Okay, so I can see a B in the middle and a 2. Now, I believe when Land Rover assembled these engines that they had different sized pistons available to them, and they would hone the block and then fit the piston that fitted the best. So what I'm saying is the B in the middle probably indicates that this is an original piston. Now, because of that, there's no exact dimension for the piston itself, but the bore minus clearance, it should be about 77.75. No, my maths is wrong. Sorry, 90.42. I was looking at the 2.6 litre engine, the 6-cylinder one that nobody has or wants. So this should be less than 90.42, 90.37. I expect this is worn because it wears on here and here. So I'm pretty sure this is a standard size piston, which is good. That gives plenty of room to rebore the engine, probably 2 or 3 more times. And that's it. That's the teardown complete. Now the machine shop does their thing. Well, that's it for now. Thank you as always for watching, and thank you to those of you who support this madness through Patreon, the YouTube member thing, or by buying charts. And also, thank you to those of you who reached out after the last video. I think we have a carburetor lined up. Still looking for a manifold though. We'll talk more about that next time. As of right now, I haven't heard back from the machine shop yet, so yeah, we'll have to wait and see how much that's going to hurt. Anyway, I'll see you next time.